Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide, which are affecting the continent. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Priscilla, Nwikpo, and I'm pleased to welcome our panel. Ayo Johnson, journalist and specialist in African affairs, Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business, and Siana Bangura, writer and producer. So, ladies and gentlemen, the much anticipated Sierra Leonean elections happened on the 7th of March. And we've waited considerable amount of days for the results. Results finally landed, and we're looking at a possible coalition. We have to go back to the polls in a few days' time. Let me come to you first, Siana. Who were your money on?
Oh my goodness. In all honesty, I had no money on anyone in particular. I think for me, as a diasporan kid, this particular election has been the first one I've paid a lot of attention to from kind of start to, so it's not finished yet, but from start to this point. And so I've been really using it as an educational opportunity more than anything. And what I have found interesting so far is, from what I can see and what I've read, there seems to be almost a positivity around this notion of having a hung parliament and coalition, which if I'm comparing it to what happens here, that's definitely not the feeling we get over here. So I wonder if there's this feeling of this could be an opportunity for actual true unity in Sierra Leonean politics. So everyone seems quite hopeful, but see.
You're just looking.
I'm watching, yeah.
All right. Well, Lanre, what were your expectations first and foremost, but who was your money on?
I'm not Sierra Leonean, so I didn't have money on anybody. The expectation was that it would be a tight race between the ruling party and the main opposition, and that's exactly what happened. And now we're going to a runoff. What will be interesting to see is whether we see kingmakers emerge, because it's not going to come down to the third and fourth place candidates. And I would say keep an eye on Kande Yumkela. He might end up in quite an interesting role in a new government, but we'll see.
Okay, interesting. I know that this you've been paying close attention to this, and I know it's very, very important to you. What are your thoughts on the outcome so far?
Well, I think it's exactly as many people had predicted. In fact, I personally had said that the two main opposition party and the actual APC and the SLPP would go neck to neck. Of course, what we've seen is tribal politics. The whole country is split between north and south, and that's not going to change. But what we've seen slowly is these emerging of these new, smaller parties who have actually made inroads. So now Sierra Leoneans are not necessarily just voting on tribal politics, which we know exist, but they're also now voting on policies. And it's based on policies. That's why these smaller parties have been able to make little inroads. And I think they would ultimately, as Lanre says, determine this next phase, because it's the smaller politics, the smaller parties who are going to shape the new government, because the two superpowers, APC and SLPP, can't do it on their own.
I mean, it's interesting you say that they're voting on policy. Having said that, back to you, Lanre. Kamara, who's the current president, he's selling himself as a technocrat, and he says there's a continuity, a cusp of irreversible change. I mean, forgive me, just hearing that, I'm thinking, well, you're still in power. How then are we at the cusp of irreversible change? I mean, it's quite
continuity and irreversible change are contradictory statements. He is a bit of a technocrat. I've met him a couple of times a few years ago. He comes across relatively well. I can't speak to whether or not he's presidential material. The consensus seems to be that the government of President Koroma has not lived up to its billing. When he was first elected, there were very high hopes that he was going to really move the country forward. And since then, he's been embroiled in some quite serious scandals, some corruption allegations. So, it's not surprising to see that there's appetite for change.
I mean, there's appetite for change, yes, but Julius Madebayo, it's not exactly change. Here's a man that it's fair to say that he did trump what was, in the first instance, a democratic government. And then now he celebrates himself for handing over to another democratic government. And, for him, that's his selling point, and one of his selling points, and that he's a father of democracy.
Is he?
So he says. How would these two leaders going forward be able to, do you think Sierra Leoneans are going to buy all of these rhetorics, as it
Well,
were.
the problem with Madabio, as you're saying, of the SLPP, he's been there before. He's been a previous president. He beat for a very short period, short period of time during the war period, and he handed over power. So that's been his trump card. I've done it. I've handed when I was asked to, but he had nothing really to show for it. He's actually tried to stand for politics previously as a president and lost.
Yeah.
So he was coming to these elections as someone who people were saying, have people really sort of shun him? Is he becoming irrelevant? Is he clearly somebody who can make a difference? Clearly, these elections, he's done the best he possibly can, and the results speak for themselves. I think the APC party with Samuel Kamara, he's clearly a technocrat. Somebody he's very quietly spoken. He doesn't have the sort of personality that people can sort of bounce off, and people think that he's too weak, he's too quiet. But others say he's as strong and as robust as he possibly can. He's done it in various levels of government throughout his entire career, including the IMF and World Bank and all these massive institutions. So he comes with a lot of experience. The question is, can these two giants, the SLPP and the APC with Madabio and Mr. Samuel Kamara, can they infuse the populace? And I think we're still on tribal politics. We're still countries divided. The question is, do the smaller parties support either one of them? And that's the problem.
Well, that's interesting. Coming to you, Siana, you made mention there about being from the diaspora, as it were, and this is the first election that you've really gotten involved in. But, as a diasporan, how do you see going forward, having looked at the different characters that are in play, and also the fact that there's a north and south divide? Can you really see these smaller parties? There were 14 parties, and truly they're the ones that are going to make the changes. But can they really hold sway? Because the two big parties have huge numbers.
They do have huge numbers, of course they do, and so that's why they're the two big parties. But I think it is bold and important and quite refreshing to see that there's other people saying, well, actually, Sierra Leone has had the same for a very long time, maybe dressed up in certain different clothing, but we keep seeing the same mistakes being made, right? We keep seeing the same decisions being made. We keep seeing the same people suffering. And I actually think that the smaller parties are able to speak maybe to more Sierra Leoneans because it is a promise maybe of some kind of change. I don't know necessarily how long it might take to kind of see some of this change that they speak of, and I think some things we've seen have been repeated. For the most part, I think that it's been quite a smooth election in the sense of there's been pretty peaceful. I think that's been good, and I think that's really important to point out because I think everyone, at least in the West, was waiting for some kind of drama. They like a bit of drama, but
so
I think
you think there was disappointment in that?
Yeah, there's a bit of disappointment, but I think most Sierra Leoneans just want it to be peaceful and we sincerely want some change. But I just think that it's a case of waiting to see what happens next. Of course, there was some electoral fraud, which was disappointing. As you were talking about the tribalism, hearing about that was a bit disappointing as well. But I think there's room for change.
But then they did cancel those votes.
They did cancel those votes, exactly. So people are reacting.
Give me a moment just give me a minute. I am coming to you. Lanre, Siana made mention there about the sufferings that had happened in Sierra Leone. We're all aware of the Ebola situation, the recent mudslides, all of that. And this government of APC was in place. Now, isn't it interesting that Sierra Leoneans were still out voting for them heavily and not necessarily chasing the policy that the newer parties, smaller parties, if you like,
I made the point that it's still largely along tribal lines, and that doesn't necessarily,
So tribal lines, these disasters, as it were, make no difference to
well, such is the nature of tribal politics, that you vote for your tribe no matter what happens. That is the essence of tribal politics. So, so in that respect, it's not that surprising. Is there an argument that it should be different? Most certainly, but I can't speak for the Sierra Leonean people. It's their election.
If it was anything other than tribal politics, then Kande Yumikela of the NGC party would have won the elections, because then you would have thought we were told that nearly 60% of the population were under the age of 30. They were voting for the very first time. Why did these people not carry the NGC with them to the highest office on the land? That just tells you that despite the change that you wish and desire, it never comes to pass because of the way the system is in terms of how people's mindsets are. It doesn't necessarily mean that because they're poor that they understand the reasons why they are poor, or whether they understand exactly how they can get out of the poverty. So
access is a major issue. For these smaller parties, though, so there are obviously people who are coming through and understanding that there's room for some kind of change.
We're looking at 2,000 votes. We're looking at 1,000 votes, 174,000, when others have the two main parties are picking up 1 million each.
Of course.
The disparity is quite wide. But Ayo, what are your predictions?
Well, it all depends on how the NGC party and the C4C party, who the NGC being the third largest party,
yes,
and the C4C taking a huge chunk of a place called Connaught, which is a place where I was funnily born, which was mainly APC.
Okay, so I don't mean to hurry you. So
yeah.
very quickly.
So basically, my point is just this: that if any one of the parties, APC or SLPP, can actually corner the two of them, C4C or the NGC, they win the election. So whoever can negotiate the best deals, get the best price.
Thank you very much. And on that note, we're going to take a very quick break. We have plenty more to discuss, so please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Priscilla Nwikpo and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel. Ayo Johnson, Lanre Akinola and Bangura are still with me. Now recently at the UN General Assembly, his very first, we heard President Donald Trump of the US say this.
Africa has tremendous business potential. I have so many friends going to your countries trying to get rich. I congratulate you. They're spending a lot of money.
Interesting. According to President Trump there, he has so many friends that are trying to get rich in Africa. Now, recently we saw that his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, commenced a multi-country visit to Africa. Now, we hadn't seen that. We didn't see a lot of that with the Trump administration. And I think it was back in the Bush days that we saw that. Now, he didn't quite make it back.
Well, he made it back, but not as Secretary of State.
That's just it. He didn't quite make it back in the position that he left the U.S. He was fired on his way. I mean, I don't know. Lanre, I'm going to come to you first. I don't know what you thought when you heard that. Was he fired because he took a trip to Nigeria when he shouldn't have? Would you think it was because of the Russian situation? What was it
It obviously has nothing to do with Africa. That was a coincidence. It has everything to do with the chaos that is internal White House politics under Donald Trump.
Right.
So it wasn't an Africa thing, not at all.
Not at all?
No.
Ayo, what were your thoughts when you heard he had been fired? I mean, I know that one moment, for instance, I was looking at the pictures of Donald Trump in Nigeria with the Nigerian president. And for a moment, I just flipped to Twitter and I'm thinking, is this a joke? Is somebody having a laugh? And then I went to the president's handle and it was there. And I just sat there like, oh, it's like that.
This guy doesn't care.
Right.
He doesn't like us Africans. We must come to terms with this. And he doesn't take us seriously.
He has friends.
He has friends
tremendous
at our
that are
expense.
Wanting to get rich.
At our expense.
And we have tremendous opportunities.
And we have no friends of ours who are trying to get rich in the US. This is the problem. So I would like it the other way around. Okay. When our leaders start saying we have friends that are trying to take advantage of the opportunities in the US as opposed to the US trying to take advantage.
But was he not selling Africa to be a good place to invest? Surely that's
in a
what he was
sarcastic
doing.
way, in a way which gives me creepy feelings, the way that I wasn't very comfortable about, in a way which doesn't show me that he's sincere, and in a way which clearly tells me this man is not for us. He's about for everything else, but not for Africa.
Right. Siana, you're agreeing with everything Ayo is saying there, but what are your thoughts?
I don't take anything this man does seriously. That's the first thing. I'm surprised he even said countries in Africa, because before I would have thought this guy thought the whole continent was one big country, for starters. So I take nothing that he says seriously. But as was said here, it feels very forced. It feels very false. I think, honestly, I don't think Trump cares about Africa. His whole rhetoric is America first, and that's only some Americans first, in all honesty. So he doesn't care about the continent.
Okay, I mean, Lanre, I'm going to come back to you. Like, as I said at the beginning there, with President Bush, it was all about aid to Africa. We didn't see much with Obama, but we did see that there was a lot of activities between his Secretary of State and the northern governors of Nigeria. And then there was also the suggestion that they wanted to split Nigeria. Do you think there was any truth in that?
That sounds absurd. Just for the record, the U.S. relationship with Africa has never been particularly close, and it wasn't very close under everyone's favorite Barack Obama either. Okay, so let's just get that absolutely clear.
Right.
Secondly, there's always been a very strong security focus, and that was long before Donald Trump was even a factor in this. But it's not all bad news. Mm-hmm. The African Growth and Opportunities Act was in January. The lower house of Congress unanimously backed expanding it and extending it. It's one of the main pillars of U.S.-Africa trade. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Trump administration announced it's not only continuing Barack Obama's flagship Power Africa initiative, but they're expanding it to not just focus on energy access, but also distribution across Africa. They're calling it Power Africa 2.0. These are the main pillars that Barack Obama put in place, and they're being extended under Donald Trump. So it's not all bad.
The question is why?
I mean, having said the question is why, I wanted to continue on this because, we recently also heard a warning coming from the US that Africa, be mindful of China. What they're doing, they're not really doing business with you in your interest. And you're saying, you're now questioning why they're extending the policy that was under Obama. I mean, surely it would be a good thing.
He has no other choice. He has to try and do something to at least appease Africans who have really shunned him and chose the Chinese, chose the Brazilians, chose everybody else in the world except them. And their influence on the African continent is slowly dwindling. So they have to step up. And the agro, which is what Lanre is talking about.
Agro.
There we go. Thanks for the agro. Yes. Yeah. Thanks for that correction. The agro is actually is the only means by which they have to actually show Africa that we can do something, because Mr. Trump doesn't have a policy. So he's got to lean on Obama. He's got to try and do something, because the Chinese are really running the whole continent at the moment. They're building our roads, building our bridges, lending us money, they're investing. The Chinese are the superpower that's engulfing the continent right now.
Siana, would you say this was, another Cold War? That is, Africa is caught in the middle, the US against China. Are we back to the Cold War?
I really think it's a case of America is very fearful about its position in the world, right? It's in a precarious position in terms of its place in the world as a superpower. Is it a superpower? Is it not? China is hot on its heels and has been for a very long time because in many ways China has been shunned by the US and welcomed by Africa. And I have strong feelings about that whole special relationship. I think it's another form of neocolonialism. So that's a whole other issue. But I just think America's very worried about the fact that China has such an influence on African nations. And I think it's selfish moves just to say, well, keep an eye out and we have to do something, even necessarily carry on with some old policies we may not want to, but we've got to do something to have some kind of influence there, right?
And on the issue of influence, Priscilla, it's not just the fact that China got there by luck or by chance. Yeah. It's because a liberalized continent, which Africa is, chose China. It said, I want to do business with you. Right. I suppose irrespective of whether you colonize us in the future, whether that relationship goes bad, we've chosen.
I mean, Lanre, on that note of, Africa chose China, most of the world sees China as a partner. The US, on the other hand, sees them as an enemy, even though China owns most of their
there's clearly a game going on. Yeah. China is a huge rival to the US, and in some levels, it's already overtaken the US. In Africa, it's certainly ahead of Washington, without a doubt. But to call it neocolonialism, I'm not too.
But are you not concerned?
I'm
that
concerned.
China.
No, I'll tell you what I'm concerned about.
It's not a fair partnership where Africa is.
I'll tell you what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is the African side of the equation.
Okay.
China has not threatened to invade any African countries.
They're just doing it quietly.
No, but if someone can colonize you without a military, then I wonder whose fault that is. This whole thing about China's coming to colonize us. Hang on, no. They're coming to obviously strike deals that are in their their favor, obviously.
But we know what leaders are to blame.
Why else would they come? Why else does anyone go anywhere except to negotiate in a way that is going to benefit them? It's up to African countries to negotiate well on their side, and some of them are. Some of them are not, some of them are. But if 30 years from now, Beijing rules China, you've got to look in the mirror, not go and point the finger at China. I'm sorry to say it.
He who pays the piper calls the tune. So the Chinese are paying us. If they're taking good care of us, then they can dictate how we run.
But us,
having said that, you know, it is fair to say that to an extent, the US and the EU did turn their back on Africa.
Yes, absolutely.
There was a time they didn't want to do business with Africa. But Siana, you know, that was then. Here we are today, 10 years on, as it were. Surely there should be better agreements between China and Africa, as opposed to the one-sided agreements that we see right now, where they come in with their pins, their water, everything, if they want to put a building up. Africa is not benefited. Shouldn't Africa really be looking into that better?
So I think Lanre's made an important point about it not being, it can't be completely one-sided, right? And I feel like I'm still sticking by my neocolonialism theory, simply because I think it's one of those very, I think it's very, very sophisticated, right? It's not the same as what we saw in the times of empire and all of that. It's very, very sophisticated, and I think that we should be worried. I think it's irresponsible to just be like, yes, we've got a great relationship with China. China's doing this, it's doing that. Who is really benefiting it? Is it, you know, the average African person, or is it African leaders? I think that's the question.
Well, you know, I wish we could go on. Lanre, you wanted to say?
Yeah, one final comment.
Very, very quickly.
What I don't like is this portraying as Africa as some sort of passive victim. Why can't Africa be an actor in its own destiny?
Time doesn't permit me. I wish we had more time.
I agree.
So we could go into that. Well, don't forget to follow us at RealJHUK on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Priscilla Nwikpo, and from the entire team here in London, goodbye and thank you for watching Journalist Hangout UK.